So please can I remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and then this recording is going to be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid background noise when others are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, please raise your hand if you have your camera on or use the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. This is for the sake of that recording. The use of the chat function should be reserved for any technical issues to alert myself or the Democratic Services Officer. So then, if we could swiftly move on to part 1 of our agenda. Now, this is the appointment of the Vice Chair as we are starting our new year. So can I have nominations, please, for this? Councillor Drake, I see your hand.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Ewan Goodjohn, please.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. And Councillor Lothrock-Edwards, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to formally second that nomination, please.
Thank you. We've got another hand. Thank you. This is Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's helpful in committees like this if actually the Vice Chair comes from a separate party from the Executive. So I'd like to nominate Councillor Chris Franks as Vice Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Franks, you've got your hand up.
I'd like to second that nomination, please.
That's not a problem. Okay, thank you. So do we have anybody else who'd like to nominate anybody? Okay, so in that case then we've got 2 nominated officers in Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Franks. So I think if I can ask you, Mark, to go through the committee and seek their preference, if that's possible.
Yep, of course, Chair, not a problem. I'll go through alphabetically, and obviously members can give me the option they wish to nominate. So I'll go alphabetically. Councillor Carroll.
Councillor Chris Franks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And then we go on to Councillor Drake.
Councillor Goodjohn.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. And then we go on to Councillor Franks.
Franks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. And obviously on to Councillor Goodjohn.
Myself, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Next we have is Councillor Haynes.
Councillor Franks.
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Goodjohn.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Hanks.
Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And then on to Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Chris Franks, please.
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Councillor Goodjohn. Excuse me, sorry.
Problem. And then on to the Chair.
Councillor Goodjohn.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Wood.
Councillor Franks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. I'll just tally up the results. Apologies, Chair, on mute. 6
Okay.
for Councillor Goodjohn, and I have 5 for Councillor Franks.
Thank you, Mark. So,
So-
congratulations then to Councillor Goodjohn. You've been appointed the Vice Chair for this year. Thanks very much. If we can then move on then to agenda item 2, which is the apologies for absence. I think everybody's present, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right, Chair.
Thank you. That's great. At this normally we would have minutes from the previous meeting, but we haven't had them yet. I think they're not ready
apologies.
for us. That's okay. It's fine.
Apologies, they will come to the next meeting.
That's fine. Thank you ever so much. Move on to agenda item 3. Now this is the declarations of interest. I don't know if anybody has a declaration to make. No? Okay, that's fine. Great. And moving swiftly on. So I've made a decision to move the agenda around a little bit because it makes more sense for us to hear the reference to do with audit after the Sustainable Development Principle topic, because we are talking about one and the same thing. So the next item on this agenda will be reports of the Director of Corporate Resources, the 4th quarter scrutiny recommendation tracker and proposed annual forward work programme schedule. I think that, Mark, you were going to just talk us through this bit, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right, Chair.
Thank you.
And just to double check, obviously with the change of agenda, there's no issues in terms of from the committee if they're happy to go along with the Chair's suggestion.
Fine with me.
Okay, oh, that's great. We'll take that
Sorry,
as agreed.
I
then,
should have
Chair.
all asked you, shouldn't I? That was really rude of me, having made that decision. But thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, great. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Committee. This is our regular quarterly report, which brings together the progress on the scrutiny recommendations from Q4, so that would be 22-23 municipal year, and to confirm the committee's proposed annual forward work programme for 23-24. The report advises members of progress in relation to the Scrutiny Committee's historical recommendations and the proposed annual forward work programme schedule for 23-24. We have a number of appendices, including as well the Cabinet annual forward work programme, as well as our work programme and the previous recommendation period tracking for the previous quarters. The main recommendations for committee to consider tonight is that the status of the actions listed in appendices A through to D to the report be agreed, that the Cabinet annual forward work programme for 23-24 attached to Appendix E in the context of Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee annual forward work programme 23-24 be noted, and that the committee's proposed annual forward work programme schedule for 23-24 attached to Appendix F be approved and uploaded to the Council's website. I'll just raise a few key points and key issues for consideration for members out of the report. Just to stress that the work programme itself is a movable feast. Bear with me, Chair. I think we've got a hand up from Councillor Johnson.
No, I was just going to. I thought Mark was drawing to a conclusion, but I'll come in when he's finished.
Yeah. Okay. No problems, Councillor. I just wanted to draw members' attention to a number of items on here for consideration. You'll note for items of consideration, we would have a number of extra points. It's just been felt to be important to sort of restate the importance of scrutiny and the importance for members, to contribute in the sense of offering reports or other suggestions for updates for the committee. So it's important that the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme, and this is on point 2.8 of the report, should provide a clear rationale so as to why particular issues have been selected, be outcome focused, ensure that the method of scrutiny is best suited to the topic area and the outcome desired, and align scrutiny programmes and the Council's performance management, self-evaluation and improvement arrangements, as well as having regard to the Council resources. 2.9 as well, based on what I previously said, during the year there may be a number of ways in which additional issues can be considered for inclusion in the scrutiny work programme, with topics coming from a number of sources. So such as individual councillors, performance of budget monitoring information, inspection reports, referrals from council, such as notices of motion, cabinet audit or other scrutiny committees, service users, and monitoring the implementation of recommendations previously made by the committee and residents of the Vale of Glamorgan. As I've said, the scrutiny programme is a rolling programme, and the results of the scrutiny impact survey will also be analysed by Democratic Services and findings considered to assist with work programme planning. On the point around residents, there has currently been a relaunch of the scrutiny topic suggestion form, and there's a link on there on the form on the report electronically that exists on the council website for residents. Will also be undertaken to assist with the work programme planning of topics for task and finish work for consideration by scrutiny committee. So that is obviously another arm of the committee as well around task and finish work. All topics for task and finish will be taken to chairs and vice chairs group to be prioritised in line with corporate objectives and in compliance with council policy, consideration of the need for changes to policy and or practice, and in seeking continuous improvement. To date, there's also been good discussion with the chairs and vice chairs group on techniques that can be used and experience shared with a view to improving scrutiny. Further discussions in relation to broadening the work programmes of all scrutiny committees will be subject to further consideration by the scrutiny committee's chairs and vice chairs group. And it's also suggested that at agenda conferences with chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny committees, management of the committee's work programme will be included as a standard item on that agenda for consideration and discussion going forward. We've also got some additional points at 2.16. It's further suggested to assist members following the member induction programme that a workshop be held regarding the tools to support effective scrutiny roles and the responsibilities set out in the Council's constitution. This also includes the relaunch of Scrutiny Cabinet Roles and Responsibilities Protocol, approved by Cabinet on the 21st of May 21, and as referred to in the above paragraph 2.15. And also 2.17 stresses that scrutiny members may also wish to take part in further questioning skills training to be arranged. 2.18, which I think again is a key thing for members to consider, is the discussions in relation to broadening the work programmes of all scrutiny committees will be subject to further consideration by the scrutiny committee chair and vice chair group in regard to resource implications and corporate priorities. The first meeting of the group post the May 2022 local government was held on the 24th of January 2023. The next meeting of the group is scheduled for Tuesday 30th of May 2023. And at the end of this as well, we have published versions of the forward work programme can be found on the main website. So just a quick whistle-stop tour through the report itself. Obviously, there's a number of appendices for the members to consider as well. And Chair, I'm happy to take any questions based on the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And I think that this is most welcome. I think that some of these points would definitely help and support us. I think as we are at the beginning of the new year, to be able to look at the different forms of scrutiny, the way that we can work together as a committee. I like the idea also of some further support with those workshops. I think that would be useful as well. And yeah, and I do have suggestions already, which once we've talked through, or everybody has had their say, of what we could use as a topic for further discussion and for task and finish group. But let's see what Councillor Johnson has to say first. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for the presentation there. A couple of different points, sort of to make. I mean, firstly, I'm it's obviously both appropriate with the new inflation figures and core inflation figure being at its highest in generations, that If we're looking at task and finish, then presumably cost of living crisis will be high on everybody's agenda, particularly given that we have an item later on today on welfare reform, which was a task and finish group literally a decade ago, and whose echoes are still being felt today. So that's obviously the first thing to lob into the pot. What I was going to say, there's two different points I want to make here. One is that our forward work programme as a committee is already, I think, quite full, and I think we have to be careful about overloading this committee in particular. I'm aware that some of the other committees seem to be quite light in their agendas and having meetings cancelled, whereas we're going on for 3 hours plus. So I think what's important is that our agenda, we've already got a forward work programme here, and that will be added to by cabinet references. So I think there does need to be a consideration as to whether this is always the most appropriate scrutiny committee, whether it needs to be coming here, where there's duplication. I felt that, for example, with the trans inclusion toolkit, that was going to learning and culture. It came here as well. I'm not sure. It was a good debate here, but was this the right place to do something that was clearly learning culture and equalities issue? So I think it's just a consideration as we go through the year not to overload our agendas, because that can become quite unwieldy and difficult then to actually have meaningful scrutiny after we've done a couple of hours of these things. What I was actually just wanting to clarify was really with regard to the uncompleted recommendations. There are a couple of things there which are ongoing or marked as ongoing, where I think really I'm not quite sure why this is still ongoing. So if we go back very far to the 17th March 2022, we've got a discussion about the annual delivery plan, which was about how it would be scrutinised in 22-23, which obviously is a year that's now already finished. So I'm not sure that's still an ongoing action that we can be meaningfully looking at. We will never ever complete circulating GVS's Vista magazine to everybody. Is that going to be there forever as ongoing? And then there are two issues where we've made references to other committees, the trans inclusion toolkit to corporate parenting, and something that went to governance and audit. Both of those have gone to those committees. So in terms of our tracking of recommendations, we've done the thing that we're supposed to do. I appreciate that perhaps in those cases they're going to then go on to cabinet, and maybe that hasn't happened, but it would seem strange to bring them back to us for clarifying that it's gone to that committee when we already know it's gone to that committee, and some of us have either been there in corporate parenting or in governance and audit and discussed it there. So I'm just looking to understand why those are still being marked as ongoing, when I think probably I would find it weird for them to come back to us again in 3 months' time, to say they're completed when I think they've already been through the system. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark.
Happy for me to reply, Chair?
Yep. Yes, please do.
Yeah, there's very good points there from Councillor Johnson. In terms of the decision tracking, I will look at those items. I know we were waiting a sort of, just for completeness, a result in terms of corporate parenting panel. I'll make sure that update is put on and then is set to completed. Similarly with the GVS, if committee are happy, because it's just a cyclical thing that we the members get, that we just put as completed now, because the action is effectively done. We've got the measures in place to send that out to members from GVS. On the councillors have a query with regards, and this was on the on Appendix A, councillor? Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Which one are you talking about? The annual delivery plan? Or,
yes.
I mean that's coming from 17th of March 2022, which obviously was referring to the 22-23 annual delivery plan, and that's now obviously that in itself that's been completed, but it's also incorporated within our work programs, isn't it? So I'm not sure there's any reason to mark it as ongoing.
No, that's fine, Chair. Fine, Councillor. We'll look at that, and we'll get that. We'll put a final update on there, and as long as committee happy, we'll just put it as completed for those items, so they can be removed from the sort of ongoing sort of recommendations that have been outstanding.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, that's a very good point. If we can review those ongoing to completed, and at least then that's sort of tidied that up, isn't it? I think the cost of living crisis would be a really good topic to delve deep into. And it's certainly something that we can look at when we go to the vice chairs and the chairs committee group. And I agree with you entirely on the weight of work that comes through this committee. And I understand it's difficult because this is the overarching committee. But when we have 3 and 4 hour meetings, we're not focused on scrutiny, are we? And by the end, people are tired. So we do have to rationalise, and that's definitely something that we've talked about anyway, haven't we, Mark? And how we can do this. And subgroup might be a good idea, and I think possibly when we've got very, very meaty topics, I don't want to take everybody's time up, but to do it justice and due diligence, to have separate meetings. But we've got to work on this one, haven't we?
Yeah, and just to say, Chair, in terms of that, and this is one of the reasons why we're going to have, as part of our agenda conference, the work programme as a standing item, so that we can properly have a look at not just the sort of the agenda, the immediate agenda. We can look at agendas going forward and look to see what we can do to ensure that we're not overfilling the agendas with too many items, which, as Councillor Johnson's already alluded to, in effect stops adequate scrutiny for those particular items, and obviously look at rationalising and streamlining and look at alternatives such as using special meetings or one-off meetings to deal with particular sort of key topics.
Yes, that would be great. Councillor Carroll, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a touch really on what Councillor Johnson was saying, particularly regarding the length of meetings. And obviously, I'm not averse to having long meetings because ultimately it is our job to scrutinise. I think there is a legitimate concern with it, though, that if we're sat here for 3 or 4 hours, inevitably, especially when you're doing it from behind a screen, people do lose energy, they lose concentration, and perhaps the quality of scrutiny and questioning isn't as good as it could and should be, simply because the nature of the meeting, it's gone on too long. There's one thing I would raise, and I did raise it briefly in the last meeting as well. I think one way that we could improve scrutiny would be to shorten the oral reports that the officer presents at the start of the meeting. I mean, often what happens, and I'm not really picking anybody out individually because I think it happens across the board, you often get a report and it's all been provided written down in advance. And then we basically get a very long, rather than a summary, we get a very long sort of synopsis of the report that can take 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then we end up, by the time we finish the item, because understandably, Chair, you need to move the item on, more time has been spent on the presentation than actually the scrutiny. So I'm wondering if we could condense the report. That might be a way of at least helping get around this problem.
And that's a fair comment also, Councillor Carroll.
And again,
sorry,
Chair, no, I was going to say, Chair, sorry, was again, this is something with this standing item now, with agenda, with forward work programme on the agenda conference. Again, this is something we can look at and look at with officers as well, how we can best present their reports at the end of the day and get those key points to members, but also
make it time bound.
More time or more perhaps succinct, and then obviously give that bit more time for debate. But that's something we can discuss with officers. More than happy to accommodate that.
And I think that would be helpful. I would not want to be rude to any officer that's spent an awful lot of time with the presentation and has given us a very, very full version. But at the same time, I think if we can set those times, so they'll know, won't they, that we're looking for a succinct 5-10 minute presentation, not a 50-minute presentation or something like that. Thank you. Next up is Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, Mark. So first off, I just wanted to ask, with the brilliant reintroduction of the scrutiny topic suggestion form, Can you let me know where that is going to? So when we get a form in, well, hopefully when we get a form in, where that's going, is that going to the agenda conference as part of the forward work programme standing item, or is that coming directly to the scrutiny committee? And as long as it's deemed admissible. And also, I just wanted to query, I didn't want to bring Tom in too early into the meeting, but I just wanted to ask about the carbon management strategy report, which I'm aware is being worked on and should be coming to us this quarter, hopefully. That's not listed on the forward work programme, and I presume that's because it's not on the cabinet forward work programme, but that is coming to us hopefully at some point soon. And I'm aware of his Project Zero Summit, his climate change summit that's coming up in September. I expect it will be before that. I'm sure he can answer, but just because July is an extremely lengthy meeting already regarding the forward work programme, just wondering that if that does come to us in that kind of time period, that we should definitely look at splitting into an extraordinary meeting for that item, because I would expect an extremely lengthy discussion on it, and as other members have already said, we don't want a 4-hour meeting regarding it, which means that proper scrutiny isn't done for the other items on the agenda.
Thank you.
Chair, I can obviously go with the first point about the scrutiny suggestion form.
Yeah.
I'll double check on the sort of life cycle of that, but the intention would be, if we did get suggestions through, we'd obviously discuss with the chair and vice chair, and potentially put these sort of items as well for consideration on the work programme. So
Yeah.
obviously them, as well as yourselves, members have got full view of those, and they may want to, propose those as future reports, because they obviously give an insight for residents and the ability to residents to have an impact on scrutiny. So we can work both in and obviously then discuss with officers going forward about implementing those reports. Just on the point before Tom comes in, about some of the items not being currently on the work programme. As I said previously, it is a movable feast, and things will come on if they're not in the cabinet or our main work programme. We will ensure that we will get them on at some point. We will discuss with officers, even if we put them on the sort of general reports that we're sort of waiting. We haven't got a specific date. So by all means, just after Tom's reply, if the items that we will be expecting in the near future, we can add them on to the work programme going forward.
That's great. Has that, can I just ask you quickly, sorry, Tom, I'm jumping in. This form that the public can use to suggest topics for scrutiny, has anybody ever used it? Has it been used? I'm just curious.
I will check that, Chair. It's something, obviously, we're bringing re-emphasis back on because relaunching it and to get that, and as part of that, there will be a monitoring of it, and we'll need to look at that and see what happens in terms of responses. If obviously, again, a lot of responses and it's working. If not, then we need to look at how we approach that, and if we need to increase publicity and things like that on that as well. But I would ask members as well if they want to share that link out with their constituents as well, in order to get that interest as well. So that is another option. But I'll try and find out as well, Chair, historically what we've had back in terms of that data. But like I say, this is all part of the re-emphasis on scrutiny and moving forward with it in terms of getting more resident involvement.
Good. Sorry, Tom, go for it.
No problem at all. And just on Councillor Goodjohn's the queries around the carbon management plan, I'll get an update on the delivery date. I know work is in progress on that one, and we're due to report the overall progress on Project Zero to your June committee meeting. The summit that you mentioned, Councillor Goodjohn, we're planning for late September, early October, and just waiting for a final meeting with the Youth Council to help co-produce that event. But we'll certainly be able to give some more information when we bring the report in June.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Lovelock Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of follow on with the strand of the discussion with regards to agenda items, length of meetings and that, and obviously Councillor Carroll's comment in relation to officers' presentations. And I think just a word of caution on that, because we, as Mark's just alluded to, the whole point of what we're trying to do here is to widen participation and engagement, and that includes members of the public who may not be au fait with the jargon that we use or the language that we use. So sometimes an officer's report is critical to sort of I suppose a more sort of straightforward language into approach in terms of explaining some background or context. So I just want the committee to be mindful of that. And one of the other points I wanted to make is, again, around the useful sort of relaunch and some of the ideas around sort of how we can improve in terms of a scrutiny committee and member participation as well, and engagement of what we do when we leave these meetings. But I just wanted to ask as well a quick question, Mark, on some of the background papers that've been referenced include the Scrutiny Committee protocol from 2017, and I raised this at the Homes and Safer Communities Scrutiny Committee. Is that are we confident that that document is fit for purpose to take into consideration this relaunch, and is there capacity for us to sort of look at that, ensuring that it is sort of aligned to what we're trying to achieve, following on from this discussion? Thanks.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to?
Yeah, of course, Chair. Sorry. Just on that last point, I am looking into that, Councillor. Obviously, I'm following from last week's meeting. I mean, that is what we currently got, but, you know, this is going to be a bit of an evolving process now. So I think if we're looking at, and you know, in general, members feel that those type of forms and the whole framework needs to be looked at again, you know, potentially we can do that. But I am looking into that for you, Councillor, and I'll share any responses with yourself and members of this, and obviously Homes and Safe Committee as well.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Haynes, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be on the thread of the long meetings myself, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Though I agree that we should not stifle officers in any way, but we have sat through meetings where effectively the report has been regurgitated verbatim, in my opinion. But and hopefully we can help officers achieve a more succinct approach. Taking that in board also with the length of reports that we get. And I do appreciate some reports have to be long. There's a lot of information, but I think it would not be a bad idea to have a proper executive summary on if it's a large report. So we at least can get the body of the idea of the report and know where to look for stuff in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. So are you suggesting that, I mean, we have an executive summary, but a more robust one? So yeah, that rather than,
yeah, more.
I get you.
In business, if you've got a long report, there'll be a thing like it often happens, much the same as a dissertation. If anyone has been to college and got a degree, that where you at the beginning you do a summary saying what's in there and where to find it effectively, and so you got the key points on the front page in half a page, maybe a page max, and that would certainly aid me, and I would hope it would aid other councillors to be more effective. I hope I've made myself clear on that as
you
well.
have.
Thank you.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And we've got Councillor Burnett now, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With committee's permission, just a quick comment in terms of this. I can accept that the level of reports and things coming through this committee, but as you said, as the sort of main or the primary committee, particularly when we are facing such challenging times as a council, effective scrutiny is paramount. But we have been having discussions about reinstating conversations between cabinet members and scrutiny chairs. And I think that that would be a very constructive way forward to look at what needs to come to scrutiny and what could be circulated for information and what format it should take. Some of the reports that are coming to scrutiny are, out of necessity, really quite complex. And so both for committee but also for members of the public that are participating, to have, as you said, to have an officer actually decipher some of the sort of terminology, etc., in those reports is very helpful. But I think during those conversations, if we can take those forward, that there can be an agreement between scrutiny chair and cabinet member, because the last thing I'd want to do is be accused of waving things by members. And so it's essential that we get that right mix of the things that come for effective scrutiny. Because at the end of the day, you know, in cabinet, there is no discussion by anybody except cabinet. And so scrutiny is the very, very important place where those discussions and debates can take place. But I hope that this will move forward, and thank everyone for their comments this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Mark, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the leader for bringing up that point about the liaison between Chair and Vice Chair and the relevant cabinet members. Unfortunately, I omitted that when presenting the report. Just to say, obviously, on Councillor Haynes's point as well about, you know, a more sort of effective executive summary. You know, that's something again we can look at with officers. Also, members will be aware on a number of occasions where we've had quite lengthy or weighty reports. Officers have tried to do, you know, an accompanying presentation or supplementary information, just as a sort of quick reference guide for members to get around some of the weightier topics. You know, that could be something we can incorporate as well with an executive summary going forward. But obviously, you know, members do have further suggestions, you know, they can let yourself know, Chair, or myself know.
Absolutely, that would be really helpful. I think at this point as well, I wanted to make a suggestion for a topic if the committee feels this might be appropriate, for a potential task and finish group in the future. And I take on board exactly and everything that everybody has said about our full work plans being quite busy, and this would work aside. So it would be for people to want to take part in this. It is something that I think would be really supportive of council as well, because they, as we know from our last meeting, there is a new procurement strategy that's been drawn up, and it is in development, and it is a living document. And alongside that was briefly mentioned to us, there is work with Cardiff Council on a shared sort of approach to procurement. And I think that with the agenda of social value, decarbonisation, and as we all know, an awful lot of carbon emissions goes through procurement, and if we get the procurement right, we can bring wealth back to the county as well. So I would really like to propose that we set up a task and finish group that looks at procurement for this authority. It is something that we would obviously need to take to the Vice Chair and the Chair group. The committee sits, I think, next week. So that will be one of the proposals I'd put forward. Also, as Councillor Johnson has suggested, that we look at the cost of living crisis. But I just wanted to know how people feel about that. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I would welcome that, and I think that's a valuable topic, because it's not just about sort of what we do, it's about the sort of how we deliver it and add value or demonstrate value, and that I think goes far beyond sort of the traditional services. And climate, as has already been referenced, and decarbonisation, as Councillor Goodjohn has referenced earlier, could be part of all of that. So yeah, would happily second that proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to think that both suggestions have carry weight. They have the basis that they're cross-cutting, and therefore how the impact we felt sort of across the council of any work that's done. I appreciate your own personal specialism in procurement, but I do therefore have a slight concern that about carts and horses, because we've just developed a procurement policy, and to me, with the best will in the world, it would have made more sense to have a task and finish in pulling that policy together rather than after it's been adopted, if that makes sense. But I mean, I think it's still a good idea, and I'm happy for if you're happy to take both ideas forward to the chairs and vice chairs group, then I'm happy to support that.
That's great, thank you. I think what we need to remember with the new procurement strategy, which, as I said, it's a living document. It's not set in aspic. It will change, and there may be things that come out of our task and finish group that will help grow, if I can say organically. But yes, I suppose in hindsight, if we'd been able to be at this stage, and with the maturity of our committee last year, that would have been really helpful. But we are where we are, and I think we can do some good work taking this forward. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, just very similar to the point you just made, Chair. This is a living document, the procurement policy, and while I do completely appreciate the point that was just made, I do think that we need to be reviewing the policy regularly. We have an extremely short period of time in order to decarbonise, to meet our targets and meet our requirements under Wales's plans to become a public sector net zero by 2030. I think that we do need a task and finish group to properly scrutinise what is happening regarding procurement and decarbonisation within procurement. I think it's a very good idea. And I think we do need to be able to properly have democratic scrutiny of that process as well. So yeah, I fully support the idea.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have anybody else who would like to comment on this particular topic? Okay then. So we'll move to recommendations. So they are that status of the actions listed in appendices A to D to that report be agreed.
What I'd add on there as well, Chair, if committee are happy to follow on from the suggestions made by Councillor Johnson about turning a couple of the recommendations to completed, for just to take them off now that they're meaningfully done.
So shall I start then, Mark, with the recommendations from what we've talked about, and then move to the recommendations as per?
It's fine either way, Chair.
It's easier for you.
I think it was only for that point one. I think points 2 and 3 should be just a matter of committee either endorsing or noting. So it's fine.
Yes. So we'll start with the recommendations that we would like the outstanding recommendations on the scrutiny committee report on the forward work on the not the forward work plan, on the outstanding matters to be closed off. There were a couple on there, so if you could look at those. There was the GVS magazine. There was the report from 2021. So there's about 3, wasn't there?
Yes.
So we could do that. There were other things that have been suggested. So I don't know whether we call those recommendations or whether you would just take those back, to do with the timings of presentations, a more executive summary with some of our more meatier reports. And as you said, that's a work in progress, isn't it?
Yeah. We certainly can put them as suggestions, Chair. I mean, whether we need to put an outright recommendation, I don't know. They are in the minute, and we can work with those as part of our agenda conferences as well.
Brilliant. And
if
also,
committee are happy for that.
The 2 suggested topics for task and finish work of procurement, and also the cost of living crisis, which we'll take to the chair and vice chair committee as well.
Yeah. And then we got the other 2 recommendations.
Yes, which is the cabinet annual forward work plan for 23-24, at Appendix E in the context of the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee Programme content be noted, which we've noted it, and that the committee's proposed annual forward work programme schedule for 23-24 at Appendix F be approved and then uploaded to the Council's website. So can we have a hand to move on that, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And can we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. That's great. So we'll move now on to agenda item 5, which is the Welfare Reform Closure Report. We've got 3 potential... no, it's Matt. Matt, he's going to take us through this report. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm obviously very mindful of the discussion you've just had, but you'll be glad to hear I was going to give this just a brief introduction in any case. And actually in the discussion you've just had, a couple of the points that I was going to make have been already made, but I will re-emphasise them. As has been said, it's quite hard to think, isn't it, that this is 10 years ago that the Task and Finish group was in place, and we're still just about coming to the end of the rollout of those welfare reforms from that time, specifically through the introduction of universal credit. Naturally, with that rollout in this report, and it's a bit of a precursor to future reporting, we've widened the scope. So we do cover many of the other issues and impacts that are impacting on the welfare of our residents at this time, especially around cost of living. So without giving too much of a synopsis of the report, I have in the report started off with a bit of a economic roundup to set the scene and give some context. Obviously, the inflation has a big bearing on us at the moment. And whilst, as Councillor Johnson mentioned, headline inflation down to 8.7% today, if you go back a couple of years and people have been saying we were talking positively about only having an inflation of 8.7%, there'd have been some surprise, wouldn't there? And importantly, I guess, when you look at the context of this report as well, tucked away in that 8.7 headline number is still food inflation at 16%. So that's a thing that has a massive impact on our residents. The 2.10 of the report really focuses on cost of living crisis, but I would like to draw people's attention to it's not just some of the pounds and pence in that section, but the volumes of payments that have been made. 22,000 in terms of the main cost of living programme and the council tax support, which we couldn't just deduct from people's bills. We had to physically pay the money across to them. So quite an administrative burden on the revenues and benefits team, and they've done a huge amount in the last 12 months in particular. The latest position then on universal credit is in section 217 on, and that is coming to a conclusion. We've predominantly been moving people to universal credit as their circumstances change, but now there's a systematic move to finish that off. We'd anticipate everybody being who is appropriate to be on universal credit will probably be so during the course of 2024 at the latest. There's some updates on benefit cap and under occupancy in sections 2.1 and 2.24. And then finally, and this is a section where some of those other issues and pressures actually manifests itself, discretionary housing payment in 2.27, and an area where we're feeling real financial pressure and also financial pressure on the council's budgets as well. So that's all I was going to say in terms of introduction. I do have a couple of the really key members of the team here with me this evening as well, and I shouldn't take credit for this report because they've written it. So I have our operational manager for Exchequer, Sue Jones, and our benefits manager, Chris Delaney, here as well. So for the more detailed questions, I'm sure I'll be looking to them, but happy to take any questions, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much, Matt. And Councillor Johnson, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure there'll be detailed questions, tonight, because I'm assuming that the sort of answers I'd have wanted would probably be included within the report if they were available. I think it started with more of a little bit of a, sort of just that sort of history lesson that it's actually quite a shock to the system to think that the bedroom tax has been in place for 10 years now. So when we talk about the, sort of the cost of living crisis, what we're actually talking about is something which builds upon what were very trying times for a substantial number of people, which never really changed. Now, and I think I was rifling through my emails from 2012, 2013, because I was asking questions, literally a decade ago, how many people will be, affected by the under occupancy charge, bedroom tax, losing 14% or 25% of, of that rental payment was quite huge. The change with the local housing assistance payments, to the 30th percentile, sort of huge impact, and people have, generally just accepted that that's the price of staying in their home, rather than the policy, which was to try and shunt people out of places where they'd lived for many years. And it's that challenge I think we all faced at the time and still do about sort of the need for appropriate housing and fundamentally pushing people out of their homes. So the struggle I've got with this report is that I don't think the information is available because of the change to universal credit and the administration of that, so that we can see exactly how many people are still being affected by the bedroom tax and by the benefit cap. Obviously, we had there were around about 1,100 households that were affected by that when it first came in about 2013, with about a split of about 2/3 of those at the time being in council housing and a third being in RSL, the social landlords. But if that's being hidden under the changes to universal credit over the years, then that's difficult to compare, what's changed, sort of in the meantime. So that's really is kind of the crux of the matter for me is sort of how many people are still suffering under that. Has there been an effective change in have people through whatever circumstances circulated within the housing stock and reduced those numbers over the years, or is it still roughly where it is? It's the discretionary housing payment information is interesting, just to see sort of where that's going, and also the increase that we've had recently in council house rental arrears. So we spent a lot of time in this committee a couple of years ago discussing our budgeting for a substantial increase in council house rental arrears, which I don't know if it really came in at that point, but it seems to be affecting us now. So there's not necessarily questions in there. It's about the availability of the data, because naturally we're dealing largely with things which were brought in that period between 2013 and 2016. They're now almost background noise, but they still affect, I suspect, a substantial number of people in one form or another, but those are being hidden within the figures from universal credit. And I don't know if either Suzanne or Christina have got any comments on how we can illuminate that and have a better understanding of the picture, because if there's 1,000 households, there's 60,000 households in the Vale. If almost 2% of them were being affected by this in 2013, those are the people who are largely amongst the most vulnerable as well. If that's still close to that, then is that exacerbating the problem for those households as we are at look at the cost of living crisis a decade later? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. I think there is still quite a lot of benefit cap under occupancy cases. We do still see them coming through in the universal credit files, but we've got no way of extracting that data. I know a lot of things are now just included as a universal credit across the country as opposed to figures for areas. I can speak to our DWP liaison officer and find out if they know if there's any way to get figures for the Vale of Glamorgan for those areas for it. And I can follow up with that tomorrow with them.
Thanks. That would be useful information, I think, just in getting the wider picture. I've got figures on this that Clive T gave me 10 years ago, which are based on the different communities within the Vale. I think I've probably, if I rifle through, I've got somewhere that might do it by ward, as they were at the time. But for us not to really have an understanding of how many people are involved in this, and it's obviously, we've got a number here, but that's clearly not going to be anything like the final figure. And it's actually, if the policy itself has completely fails and nobody's mitigated these people have been requiring the discretionary housing payments to mitigate this at various points over the last 10 years, then there's a huge policy failure in here somewhere, isn't there?
Yeah.
So thanks, Christine.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I'm going to ask a really obvious question to do with under occupancy, because it's something that I was interested in. For single people who live in a 2-bedroom property and there isn't an alternative 1-bedroom property, are we still giving that 14% reduction?
Yes.
Oh dear.
There's
right.
There are some exemptions. So if so it's only obviously for people in this particular one, it's only for people in social housing.
Yeah.
If they need overnight care and they meet certain criteria, we can allow an extra room for them, but there are very few exemptions to it, so most of those will be affected by it.
That's quite harsh, isn't it? If there isn't a 1-bedroom property available, and a single person on their own is obviously going to struggle to pay for all of their bills and all of their food.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Right. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank you for the report, and obviously, as Councillor Johnson has already referenced, 10 years on, and obviously it's quite depressing what we are still facing, and it goes wider and deeper than I think that perhaps the authors of the Task and Finish group would have thought possible. However, we are where we are, and I just wanted to talk about whilst this is a closure report, is there any capacity to broaden any future reporting to include pension credits? Because obviously 10 years on, and there's going to be, in terms of the population and the age profile within the Vale, there'll be an increasing number of people who are transitioning from universal credit into pension credit. And as we know from with my older People's Champion hat on, there is across the UK over £200 million of unclaimed pension credit, and the impact that has. And I just wondered if there was any capacity to incorporate that in terms of what work the council is doing to engage with members of the public who may be approaching that sort of position, so they know in advance what they may be entitled to, and how to reach out to those who may well find themselves in a position where they don't know that they're entitled to make such a claim. And I don't know how this could work with the welfare reform document, but it's something that is really I'm, as you can see, I'm quite passionate about, and I think is being not enough work is being done by central government to alleviate poverty amongst older people, that I think perhaps the council could consider stepping in to help. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sure, Councillor, we can include that in future reports, and obviously cost of living is a very broad area, and that's not inappropriate at all. So we're looking into doing that, and we'll have a look at what data and information initiatives we can bring forward in front of you.
Thank you.
I think that's really helpful. I mean, we know, don't we, because we're seeing it, we have homeless old people, which is heartbreaking. But it is just the situation, isn't it, with this cost of living? It is horrendous. So maybe, a portion of this work can focus on all of the issues for older people with the cost of living crisis. I think that would be, as you said, and they are one of our most vulnerable groups, aren't they? That would be entirely appropriate. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just be interested to hear if any work had been done to try and improve the communication around some of the support available. I just cite an example from a constituent of mine that took place that I dealt with about a year ago, and it basically involved a constituent who would have been eligible for the winter fuel support scheme as a result of being eligible for council tax reduction. He, due to issues with his personal circumstances, hadn't applied for that reduction. And as a result, he wasn't then notified by the council that he would be eligible for the winter fuel support as well. So you had a double whammy where he wasn't receiving the reduction that he would have been eligible for. And then on top of that, because he hadn't had that signed up, obviously, then he didn't get notification of the winter fuel support. The council tax issue in the end was rectified, and I had a meeting with a finance officer who dealt with it. But obviously, the winter fuel support scheme was time limited, and so had a deadline, and he had passed that. And so I was just wondering if any work had been done to ensure that perhaps that wouldn't be the only case where someone had fallen through the system like that. People can be made aware of these schemes that are available. Now, I get that winter fuel support is in the past now, but the point I'm making is that there are other examples where that could likely happen. And so other than just writing out to people, other work that could be done to ensure that people are made aware of things that are available.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Anybody got any comments they'd like to make on that one? So you're muted, Matt.
So I can speak in the generality of it, but I probably need some extra support about Chris and Sue. So, you know, we've done a huge amount to publicise the myriad of schemes that are out there. Unfortunately, people do fall through the cracks sometime, and there are examples as Councillor Carroll has just given. But there has been significant comms, and we do our best to make sure that everybody who's eligible is able to receive payment. I don't know if there's more that Sue or Chris would like to add.
Yeah, I was going to say the first year was very difficult because I think it came in very last minute and had to be set up very quickly. And with everything else, I think it was a bit of a baptism of fire for it. So I think we learned on a lot on that one, and they made changes then to the eligibility for the one that's just finished. And so on that one, we did write out where they just had to just put a code in for anyone who's getting council tax reduction. So anyone then as well, if we were putting claims into payment, we were also advising them they would also qualify for it. So we ran reports to identify the people who we knew definitely met the eligibility, and anyone then who didn't actually make a claim, even though we sent a number of letters out, we also tried contacting them where we could on the phone. And anyone that we haven't, the money's actually been added onto their council tax account this year. So there has been a big improvement, and we did contact, people like support providers and things like that to make sure they were aware, to try and make as many people who were assisting people aware of the eligibility as well, to try and help them.
Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, I think there has been a quite comprehensive discussion about the past and present, so I won't dwell on that too much. And I think that there has been significant improvements in advertising, but it's quite difficult to give support that you don't have, that you can't give, even if you are communicating it to everyone, especially in dire times like this. But I just wanted to ask about the Bevan Foundation's recent report. I'm aware they've published plenty of reports on this subject, and we've been discussing this for a very long time, but they've been discussing about having an integrated Welsh benefits system, and been taking, I believe they've been giving evidence to the Welsh Affairs Committee, among other things, and they've been having discussion with Welsh Government on this. I was just wondering if you've had any look at it, have you had any discussions regarding it, and what can be done looking at it to work cohesively with Welsh Government and UK Government on the possibility of integrating these systems in the future. Have you at all discussed it with them?
I've not been involved in any meetings with it. I've seen there was a report that was provided yesterday via the WLGA, which was the outcome of their recommendations, but we've not been involved at this stage with it.
Thanks. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, what would you like to ask?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, a bit chesty. It's just a clarification, really. This discretionary housing payment, is it open to all housing benefit claimants?
It's anybody who's in receipt of either housing benefit or getting housing costs via universal credit. So as long as they're in payment, if there's a shortfall between what they're getting in support and what their rent being charged is, they can apply for discretionary housing payment.
Okay, it just seems that the application numbers seem quite low, and I think perhaps not enough has been done to broadcast the availability, should we say?
I mean, we try, if we come across cases where we think, that might assist them, we will signpost to people, and try to assist them with the forms and things like that. And so, we do try, and obviously there's a lot that come in from the support workers as well. There are a lot of applications where people don't follow up though as well for it, where we need, because with the discretionary housing payment, they also have to provide details of their expenditure as well. So it's more like we look at their income and expenditure. So, sometimes people, I think when they start looking at it, sometimes they find other ways to do it. Some people don't follow up. So we do, try and identify people that way.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask you before I bring in Councillor Johnson, in terms of how people apply, do we have different ways that they can apply if they are neurodivergent or if they have issue with form filling? Are there other ways that they can do it?
If they can't do the form, other people can do it for them. Like we can accept a form from a support worker, from their landlord, assisting them, a family friend, sorry. And we'll also assist people. We can do it over the phone via appointments for them, and we'll do it for them as well. All our staff are available to do that.
Thank you. And we make that offer visible, do we?
Yes, they're all told that, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I wasn't planning on talking about DHP, but I think it is an interesting point that I think Councillor Haynes has raised about the numbers that complete applications, the number that maybe we refuse, and the number of people who start the process but don't reach the end, because the starting the process is obviously an indicator of a level of need, even if it's one which for which they're not entirely eligible for the DHP. So I think that would be an interesting figure to see, because I think we've got 2 years that we've been given here which are fairly similar, between 360 and 380, but it would be interesting to know how many people start the process and then drop off. I mean, because if you think about it, that there's, I don't know what the figures are now, but the figures we were given back in the day were sort of around 5,000-6,000 people or so on housing benefit back then of some format. So that's a 5% of people sort of completing the process, but is that a lot? Where's the comparison? Is there a comparison is there a benchmark elsewhere in Wales for that? I think would be interesting, because obviously DHP is ongoing. Similar to that, I was just looking to get a bit of clarification around how this is going to be reported to us in future. If this is a closure report on the 2013 welfare reform changes, and we're going to be continuing reports on cost of living crisis, I'm just checking how exactly that's coming through to us, because it's within various different places. I'm just checking that we're able to keep a good handle on how this is being reported and being able to scrutinise those things. I don't know if Matt's able to come in on that, because it's whether that's quarterly performance ratings or for annual reports on cost of living, should be far more frequently, I'd imagine, given the issues at the moment. You mute, Matt.
Sorry, Tom's here, and probably Tom would be able to cover that a little bit better than I can.
Thanks, Matt. And yeah, thanks, Councillor Johnson. I think the anticipation was that exactly as you just described, that we would provide regular updates that are pertinent to the remit of each of the scrutiny committees as part of the quarterly performance reporting, and perhaps subject to the discussion that's had at the scrutiny chairs and vice group around task and finish work, and whether there's any particular area of focus around cost of living, we could then maybe supplement that with the composite report, like we do for Project Zero, for example, which is another one of the critical challenges in the annual delivery plan, if that would be useful for elected members. And then you'd get to see both the range of data that colleagues have described from an exchequer perspective, but also perhaps the other side in terms of some of the outreach work that the council's doing more generally around the cost of living. So just some suggestions for maybe members to consider.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else have any questions on this particular agenda item? No? Okay, that's great. So we'll just move to recommendations then. And they were that the committee considers the contents of this report and agrees that the welfare reform agenda should be incorporated into the wider cost of living agenda moving forward. So we can agree that. So can I have a hand to move on this topic, please? Thank you, Councillor Fluck-Edwards, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hanks. That's great. So we shall now move swiftly on to agenda item 6. This is the Vale of Glamorgan Council application of the Sustainable Development Principle in service areas. And I think we've got Tom and Ian to take us through this report. Thank you.
That's right. Thanks, Chair. Shall I go first?
If you'd like to, that would be great. Thank you.
That's fine. Yeah. Just a bit of background on this. We did the review to gain assurance that the council has effective arrangements for ensuring that service areas are applying the Sustainable Development Principle. That stemmed from some concerns we previously had regarding the leisure contract renewal. We took considerable assurance from the council's actions taken following those concerns, but we wanted to explore the council's wider arrangements for service areas and their application of the Sustainable Development Principle. So our findings were, on the whole, very positive. We found that the council's culture was geared to helping drive the application of the Sustainable Development Principle. And examples of that strong culture included clear direction and leadership from senior officers, the corporate framework underpinning the corporate plan that promotes consideration of the Sustainable Development Principle, and the cross-cutting multi-directorate ways in which the council works. Overall, we found that there was effective corporate support to help areas apply the Sustainable Development Principle. So this included things like the corporate performance partners who were allocated to different service areas, and to provide support and challenge in areas such as service planning and self-assessments. We also found the council has mechanisms in place to assure itself that services are effectively applying the Sustainable Development Principle. This includes things like the peer review and challenge process for directorate self-assessments. So, as I say, overall, there were a lot of positives to come out with this review. We found a couple of areas where the scope to further build upon the strong foundations that the council has. These are set out in the 2 recommendations on page 5 of the report. The first recommendation is about strengthening the council's project management documentation, so things like its business case templates, to include prompts that facilitate consideration of the Sustainable Development Principle at an early stage. And the second recommendation relates to the council strengthening its learning and development offer. Although training on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was provided when the Act was first introduced, there's scope to refresh that and further develop the knowledge of staff and to help maintain the momentum that's currently being displayed. So that's a summary of the report. I'd be happy to take any questions, though. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. I mean, I think that because of the world we live in now, because of climate change, because of the need to reduce carbon emissions. It's something that we all have to do and we've all got to get involved with. And I think that if you can embed circular economy principles into what we do, then you're going to cover off all of this, which is basically the need to remove waste from everything, from all of our projects, procurement, and we need to help people to make sense of this. And I'm saying that because, and with the Future Generations Act, it is this, but what does that mean in work, in practice? What does that mean in terms of how I act? And I think the circular economy is the answer. And I'd like to see with L&D a reference to that, because I think it would really help people. If you see what I mean. Where do we remove the waste? And everything we do, we take the waste out of it. Anybody else got any comments that they'd like to make on this? I think it was Councillor Carroll first. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I've got to be honest. My view on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is that a lot of it is lip service, if I'm being honest with you. But in terms of this principle, and particularly the 5 ways of working, to be honest, I'm surprised that when it comes to project management especially, there's a need for people to be prompted on it. I mean, if you look through these, I mean, the Sustainable Development Principle means that bodies must act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Fine. But then you look at the 5 ways of working. You've got long-term thinking, prevention of problems, integration of sustainable development, collaboration between departments, and involvement of service users. To be honest, I'm not quite sure why somebody needs to be prompted on that.
Well, I think what we found a lot of this is cultural, and analysing and looking at culture isn't necessarily easy. But what we did find that there was a healthy culture in the council, and there was, for example, you might have a cross-cutting board that would like in respect of Project Zero, for example, and other cross-cutting ways of working, and you'd have good challenge from senior officers. But we just thought that, to supplement that, it's when people in service areas are off, start initiating work, whatever that may be, that so certain prompts that actually the council's brought in as part of the directorate self-assessment process, which we think are an effective supplement to that, which really force that way of thinking, I suppose. Albeit the council's done a really good job, I think, in creating that mindset more widely through its staff. We just felt that there is scope to sort of have those reminders at an early stage, so that opportunities aren't missed, really.
Okay, thank you.
When you talk about the project management toolkit, are you also looking at commissioning as well, or has that already been looked at?
I can potentially pick that one up, Joe, because the procurement policy and strategy has been refreshed really recently. They more explicitly reference those 5 ways of working in terms of how that process for commissioning works. I think the findings that Audit Wales colleagues found in terms of the project management toolkit is a matter that, because that hasn't been looked at for a number of years, whilst some of the ways of working are reflected, they're maybe not as explicitly prompting colleagues to consider those things in the round as perhaps they could do. So it's a welcome action, and it's due for us to review anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, your hand is up.
Muted. Thank you, Chair. Much on the same point. It just seemed odd to me that this was even a report item, that someone needs to be prompted to do the job that's been asked of them. It's the sort of thing your superior would say after you didn't do it. Oh, can you do that next time, please? You know, it seems like a lot of effort to create sections of a report for something that could have been dealt with in an email. It's just a comment on it, really, rather than any true criticism. Just seemed a little odd to me. Well, thank you.
Councillor Burnett. Oh, sorry, Ian. Did you want to come in on that? Sorry.
I know it's not strictly a question, but you know, to come in on that, I think, you know, it's taken a few years. You know, the Act's been in place for a few years. Public bodies over that time had to adjust to that. Not saying it's brand new. Of course, it's not brand new. There's, you know, the principles are there, but there's quite a lot of nuances that, you know, have come out. And, you know, for example, go back to the Directorate Self-Assessment, which last year they brought this process in and forced that reflection from directorates, you know, to think about this, because it's a statutory duty that councils have, and to really sort of live out the principles of the Act takes quite a lot of doing, really, and it has to be at the forefront of people's mindsets, and really, that, you know, it's our statutory duty to also sort of analyse councils in this regard. So that's where the project originated, and that's where the recommendations stem from.
Thank you, Ian. And I completely support this, because I understand that you have to find a way of translating this into a workable procedure and process, and it has to be embedded. And I think for some people, they will understand, they'll get it, but I think it needs to be more than an email. I do. So yeah. Councillor Burnett, you wanted to come in.
If I could, Chair.
Please.
It's a tricky one, really, in that the Future Generations Commissioner has been in place, what, about 8 years now? And I was only thinking that we don't tend to use the phrase sustainable development so much anymore, because since we've had Future Generations. But an awful lot of this stems back in my, you know, dim and distant past. The Brundtland Commission, which was a United Nations commission, and they published a report called Our Common Purpose. And that talked about the triangle of sustainable development, which was economic, social, and environmental. And actually, that was pretty well an equilateral triangle. Now, I think we'd probably say that it's not, that, you know, that environment has taken precedence. But at the same time, most of the conversations we have relate to the need to try and find a balance between the three areas there. The fact that we're still discussing those areas, even though these basic principles were outlined in I think it was 87, it's in late 80s, proves that we have to keep visiting it, because, you know, we looked at the introduction of separated recycling in the Eastern Vale, and it went absolutely swimmingly, but we still had some people saying, why am I sorting your rubbish for you? There are still conversations to be had. There is still work to be had as we move forward. So any report, because, you know, when we get reports from Wales Audit, they are constructive criticism. They are nudges, sometimes a bit more than nudges, but they are nudges in the right direction to help us to explore those key themes. And I, you know, personally, I find them hugely useful in moving forward. And it's also a good way to look back and say, well, we're not there yet, and we still need to be looking at these principles and moving forward if we are to achieve. I mean, by the time we get through this administration, we'll be, what, 3 years away from our commitment to zero carbon? It's a bit of a frightening thought, isn't it? So, you know, the more discussions that we can have, and the more constructive analysis of where we are and where we need to be, you know, it's actually what we need to be a successful administration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think this is appropriate time to refer to a quote. Then this was an American social activist called Pete Seeger, and he wrote this song a long, long time ago, but it is so true for us today. So if it can't be reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, refinished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted, redesigned, or removed from production. And I'll leave you with that one, because I think that should be all of our mantra today. Does anybody else want to pass a comment on this particular agenda item? No, that's great. So we'll move to the recommendations, which were that the committee considers the findings arising from the review of the council's application of the Sustainable Development Principle in service areas. That was Appendix A. And the response to the review findings and Audit Wales recommendations from Appendix B. Recommendation 2 was that, subject to Recommendation 1, the report be referred to Governance and Audit Committee and therefore after to Cabinet for their oversight and endorsement of the proposed council actions at Appendix B to address these recommendations. So can I have a hand, please, to move? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. That's great. So we'll move swiftly on to the reference that we move down our agenda, because it follows nicely after the one we've just had, and that is Audit Wales, the Vale of Glamorgan Outline Audit Plan 2023. This was heard at Governance and Audit on the 25th of April. So it's just going to give us the scope of what we're going to be looking at for this next year: financial statements, VFM, value for money, that is, continuous improvement, and also, as we just discussed, the Sustainable Development Principle. So I think it's over to Ian to take us through this report. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yes, as the Chair said, this was originally presented at GAC last month. There'll be a full audit plan later in the year. This is just the outline one. So it sets out the responsibilities we have in respect of the audit of financial statements, includes information on our performance audit work programme for 23-24. That includes 2 thematic reviews we intend to do at all 22 councils on commissioning and contract management, and on financial sustainability, which is building on our earlier work in this area. We also intend to do a local project at the council on the planning service, and we're currently scoping what that project will look like. So the plan also set out who the local audit team is and the audit timeline. So the full plan later in the year will provide the audit fee, but we've already informed councils that our financial audit fee will have an increase of around 15%. This is in large part due to the impact of ISA 315. Appendix 1 of this outline plan details the key changes brought about by that auditing standard. I think the rest of the document is largely self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take any questions on it. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah, mute to Chair.
There we are. I thought I had a technical problem then for a minute, but it just wouldn't come off mute. Does anybody have any questions for Ian? No? Okay, that's great. It must have all been very straightforward and easy for people to follow then, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. So the recommendations then for this were simply that members review and agree the proposed Audit Wales Outline Audit Plan 2023 for the Vale of Glamorgan Council, and thereafter we're going to refer it on to Cabinet for their oversight. So can I have a hand to move on this item, please? Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, and Councillor Hanks to second it. That's brilliant. Thank you. So now then, we shall move swiftly on to agenda item 8. This is a report of the Director of Environment and Housing. This is leisure management contract update from Miles Punter. So can I hand you over? Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Chair and committee, there are 2 reports in this agenda, a part 1 and a part 2. The reason for that being our contractors with Parkwood, who are a private contractor. There's financial information which is sensitive, so the part 1 report deals with the matter in principle, and the part 2 deals with the detail a bit later on. So, by way of background, the council has a contract with Parkwood Legacy Leisure for the provision of leisure services for its leisure centres. We entered into that contract in August 2012. So it was due to expire in 2022, and the council made a decision to extend that contract for 7 years and 5 months. In the background, you'll see then that we've got the various committee report resolutions that allow us to extend that contract. The biggest issue essentially with this contract is that whilst we were working through the extension, the pandemic kicked in. So we had to, from March 2020 to March 2022, we had to provide some considerable support financially to Parkwood so they could survive, essentially. Fortunately, they were subject to furlough, their staff. So the funding from the hardship fund, which came from Welsh Government to support them through that period, was not as much as it should have been, but it was all essentially government funded. So the part 2 report deals with the amounts of funding we had from the hardship fund for 2020 and 2022. And we also had to support them ourselves through reserves from March 22 up to December. So essentially, there have been 2 big challenges for the contract. One is the pandemic, which we're hopefully over, and the second being the cost of living crisis. And primarily with this contract, it was the cost of energy. Essentially, the contract works on the base figure for energy, which is increased by CPI from 2012 when the contract was put together. And when we came to negotiate the extension, though Matt and I tried quite hard, because myself and Matt Bowman were involved in the extension of the contract, we were unable to pitch the energy costs at the rate that they were at that time. You can imagine they were at a very high rate. So essentially, we had to negotiate a baseline figure with Parkwood Legacy, which meant there was a shortfall in the contract of 200,000. So for 23-24, we've added 200,000 to the budget to meet the energy needs from the contract. There were other options we could have considered, such as closing the swimming pools and ways of saving energy, but we thought that would be certainly a backward step. And we do hope, and we still hope, that the energy costs associated with this contract and energy in general will come down. But the base budget has been adjusted, and we're hoping then for the end of this financial year, the contract will no longer require any additional financial support from us. And I say that's detailed under part 2. The report also talks about value for money. I was hoping to be able to present to you the costs of the provision of leisure across all 22 local authorities. We have sought that information via a Freedom of Information request, and we're still waiting for the responses to come back. But I will say to you, in 2019-20, when we last did this assessment, we found that we were the only council in Wales that was actually getting an income from its leisure contract. So at that point, our income per annum was 267,000, and the subsidies across Wales range from 200,000, which was the lowest, to 3.5 million. So in terms of the contract that we have, we think it's excellent value for money. And if you compare it with other councils in Wales, that hopefully would be further demonstrated. As I say, when I get that information updated, that was 2019-20, I will present it to this committee. The other issues in the report is we had an audit of the services back in 2020. And as Ian has pointed out, there were some issues with the sustainable development principles with the contract. Primarily because the contract was written in 2012 and the legislation came in 2015. What was good, though, when we accepted all the comments from Ian and his team, was that Parkwood were very, very much willing to work with us to basically work on the recommendations that come from the audit committee. So much so they've employed an additional officer to work on that principle. So we're taking the new KPIs we developed and the whole response to the audit report through the other scrutiny committee that we report to. Essentially, that's it, Chair. In a nutshell, that report, as I say, is quite positive. We are hoping the projections currently suggest there'll be no other financial support for this contract because it provides us an income. And that's our projections so far for 2023-24. Obviously, we're only partway through it, but the numbers coming through the doors at the leisure centre is decent, particularly since the work we've had done there. I don't know whether members have visited the centres recently, but they're looking pretty good. So we're hopeful this contract will continue now up until December 2029 and be as successful as it has been since 2012. Fingers crossed, no other major national disasters, Chair.
Thank you, Miles. Councillor Johnson, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Miles. I think it's worth reminding ourselves the reason that we asked for this report to this committee, which is that because obviously the Healthy Living and Social Care Committee is the natural place for discussion around the provision of leisure centre facilities and generally around the contract as well. But it was coming to us, I think, in October last year around the amount of subsidy that was going to be required for the 22-23 financial year, and the concern that was expressed in the meeting at the time, I think, was that we wanted to understand the sustainability of that amount, what was causing it, and sort of and how that would work going forward. Was it going to be was there a permanent gap that needed filling as a result of COVID, or is this something that was going to be temporary and hopefully therefore resolved? So I appreciate there is more detail available for us under part 2, and we can maybe discuss some of that under part 2, but I think it's a positive thing from the Corporate Performance and Resources Committee perspective, if others agree that that we're anticipating that we won't be required to subsidise this contract going forward, because that financial element is the reason that we asked for this. It's I think the frustration is, and as you probably heard earlier, Miles, that we discussed the length of our meetings and the amount of reports that we have, but I think I'd have welcomed the reassurances that you're giving us tonight. It would have been helpful to be able to have this report, more in a more prompt fashion after we'd, got concerned about, being £500,000 down in that year. So yeah, thanks, Chair. It's I suppose that's more comment than question. Although one of the commenters, you do seem to be in the same room as Councillor Haynes. I mean, it's a good backdrop. That
we've always been close, Chair.
Very good, very good. Councillor Hanks. Oh, sorry, it's Councillor Haynes next. I do apologise.
Yes, I noticed Miles and I are sitting next to each other, or opposite each other.
You share the same taste of interior design.
Yeah. Yes. First off, I'd like to thank Miles for his answering the questions, a number of the questions I was going to ask, which is very useful, so I don't have to ask them. I know this is a little bit pedantic, but you know me and words. I'm a bit confused why you use the word benchmarking rather than comparative survey. I think it would be better to use what it is. I would not like us to be deemed as the model which all people measure us against, because we could fall down and that wouldn't be good. But that being said, as I say, you answered a number of the questions. The only other point I would like to make is I do think we should send these out to tender, even though we may have a preferred contractor because they're doing well, but it would be useful to know who else is out there, and it would be a good negotiating tool if we had other people sitting there waiting to take over if it came to it. But there may be reasons for that. I'm totally unaware. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chair, do you want me to respond?
Can we respond to that in part 2? Would that be okay? Is that okay, Councillor Haynes? It's a commercial question, so we'll wait for part 2. Thank you. Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, well done, Miles. I think it's good to read such a positive report, and well done to the officers who have come up with these contracts and under difficult circumstances. I think we're one of the best in Wales to have survived, you know, the COVID and these hard cost of living, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come in here because I sat on the first cross-party committee in 2010, which considered bringing in a private operator for leisure services. We were finding extreme problems at the time by subsidising leisure enormously throughout the years, and that committee was chaired by Councillor Ernest. There were representatives from each political group on that committee, and this is where it first started. And subsequently, in 2012, I was the cabinet member, which actually signed the contract with Councillor Moore to take on Parkwood Leisure, and this was considered. Parkwood Leisure was one of 7 contractors that applied for the contract, and they proved to be certainly the best. We had consultants to advise us as well in the procedures, so we knew where we were going. And quite honestly, they've been a very good contractor. They set up their own trust in Legacy Leisure, and subsequently they've been very successful. Now, we also took in a number of trusts at this time, at the same time as we were considering who would get the contract. We met a number of local authorities across South Wales to take a presentation of the trusts that were working for them. Quite simply, I have to say, we went with Parkwood. We felt they were the better operator. And it's proved that because the trusts that were with other authorities have fallen by the wayside. And throughout the period, I was cabinet member till 2017, Parkwood proved what we expected. So I must say that it's worked very well. Yes, we hit difficult times then when COVID came along, and that was not something that nobody expected. And moving on from there, of course, it's the national disaster, the cost of living and the inflation charges. And quite honestly, when you look at the charges for gas and fuels, quite simply, that is something that wasn't expected again. We've done well out of this contract, but until these issues that have arisen, we had a choice of either going down that road and closing leisure centre swimming pools, which we as a council thought, well, we'll do our very best to keep them open, because other councils in Wales had to close their swimming pools during the winter period. Some councils have put 2 or 3 million into their leisure contract, their leisure services over this period. And on top of that, as Miles has just said, we are trying to find out at the moment, we're waiting for a response on what it's costing other councils in Wales. And I was always, when I wasn't on the cabinet in 2019, I took particular interest in the leisure services, as I always have done. And quite simply, it was very clear then that we had the best offer. And of course, we had the best person, and we still have the best person in Wales, in Dave Nevitt, as a leisure officer. I've been to a number of conferences where Dave has spoken at and led the way and convinced people they would be better following our lead. Unfortunately, some councils chose the trust that didn't work out well. Maybe we were lucky, but it worked out well for us. And of course, you will see the new figures in part 2 tonight, and hopefully we can continue down this road and bring things back in the years ahead. Hopefully we don't have this problem in the future, And it's something that was just unforeseen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John. Yes, you can't imagine how leisure services through the COVID pandemic and now the energy crisis can survive. So without some support, it would be impossible, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and has anybody else got any questions? Okay, no, so it's just one quickly for me, and it's just a suggestion, because I know that we need to try and focus and provide the evidence of where the Sustainable Development Principle is applied to the ongoing contract. I was wondering, seeing as they have appointed a community development officer, whether during our performance reviews we could bring in one of our sustainable development officers to work with them, to kind of like to work on what we can do. It would it would help provide your evidence of how we're doing this. That's all.
Yeah, not an issue for me, Chair. I mean, all of the principles are accepted certainly by us, but also by Parkwood. They've done some excellent work in England and other contracts that very much mirrors the principles in Wales, and done it with academics as well. So we're very pleased with their response. They didn't take the response that some contractors could take. It's not in the contract. They've never been like that. And one of the things we do as well, we have an open book arrangement with them. So if they say they need money, they show us their accounts. So that's the way it's worked. And when we put the 50,000 and 75,000 in via cabinet decision up to that figure to support them, they would show us at their accounts so we would provide them the support. So, and I've worked with lots of contractors in my career, and they're one of the best I've worked with, I have to say.
That's good. Any other comments then? No? Okay, that's great. So we'll move straight on to the recommendations. And they are that Scrutiny Committee note the current financial position, which we're going to discuss in part 2, but the support provided to the leisure centre provider through COVID-19 pandemic and the current economic challenges. And I think that was just noting of the report. So can I have a hand to move on this agenda item, please? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. And also I've got a seconder, I think, of Councillor Hamilton, unless he wants to speak. Is that right? Yeah, great. Thank you. Great. So if we move on to agenda item 9, Councillor John, do you want to put your hand down or do you want to speak again before I move on?
No, I don't want to speak again. I just can't get rid of the hand.
Can't get it down. That's okay. That's okay.
Maybe Mark could help out.
I've just lowered it now, Councillor John.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. So agenda item 9, which were any items which the chairs decided are urgent part 1. You'll be relieved there aren't any. Part 2, now this is in accordance with section 100A bracket 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, should anybody want to know. And this is the point at which we have to say goodbye to the public that may be listening in. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, that's right, Chair. As long as yourself and committee are happy, we'll move into part 2. I will stop the recording.